Welcome everybody. Good evening. We're the Nebraska Mycological Society, and we are absolutely thrilled to announce our speaker today, Eugenia Bone. Eugenia is a nationally known food and science writer. Her work has appeared in many magazines and newspapers, including the New York Times, the National Lampoon, Saveur, Gourmet, BBC Science, and the Wall Street Journal, where she's a frequent book reviewer. She's a member of the American Society of Science Writers and former president of the New York Mycological Society. She is a member of the faculty at the New York Botanical Garden, where she teaches classes in microbial ecology, psychedelic mushrooms, mycology, and mushroom preservation. A master canner, she has authored or co-authored 8 books on food and biology and has been nominated for a variety of awards, including the Colorado Book Award and a James Beard Award. Eugenia is featured in the documentary by Louie Schwartzberg, Fantastic Fungi, and the mushroom episode of Michele Obama's Higher Ground production show. Eugenia, may I say, is an absolute honor to have you here tonight, and this talk's going to be a lot of fun, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks. Thank you, Derek. I really appreciate it. And I love the fact that the Nebraska Club has just started, and I really hope you flourish. So this talk is about our Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook and how we put it together. But first, I thought I'd share a little bit about my own background. That was a very nice introduction. I appreciate it. But here are a few details I don't usually put in my bio. So I'm an Italian American, and growing up for family recreation, we didn't sail or do any sporty stuff. We foraged for food. I grew up in the spending the summers in Provincetown, which is a little fishing village, or was then, at the tip of Cape Cod. And there we would seine for whitebait, which are little tiny minnows that we would fry whole and eat with their faces on. And they're delightful, crunchy, salty tastes of the sea. And I found out later from the chef Pierre Frenet that in France, they put those fried whitebait into an omelet. We also collected blueberries. We collected mussels on the breakwaters, and we collected moon snails, which were a great fun as a child for me to pursue, because at low tide we'd follow these little trails. They were like mole trails, and we'd follow those trails until we get to the lump at the end that had this big snail on it, and we dig that snail up with our toes, and the snail's foot would wrap around our toes. And I have to say, it's probably my earliest erotic experience. Anyway, my dad would cook these moon snails up with chicken, and we would hunt for mushrooms, mainly morels in old apple orchards. And I was later I got into shooting. I hunt ducks. I hunted for many years. I hunted ducks at a family place in Arkansas. But it was mushrooms, especially when we got a little cabin in the Rocky Mountains where my husband is originally from, and we started to find the Boletus rubriceps, these magnificent porcini mushrooms, that I started to really kind of fall in love with the quiet hunt. I mean, I've always been a wild food enthusiast, but I really, at the end of the day, prefer to find critters that hide rather than chase critters that flee. So I've written a number of cookbooks and contributed to other people's cookbooks and all kinds of food magazines, especially Saveur magazine, and written popular science like this book, Microphilia, which is about mushroom hunting, and it drops into some basic mycology. It's a good starter book if you're just getting interested in mushrooms and want to get a little bit of mycology under your belt. Anyway, this fellow Louie Schwartzberg read Microphilia, and he started to correspond with me and talk about this movie idea he had. And eventually I got it. He filmed me for his film Fantastic Fungi. So the way this movie was distributed is kind of an interesting story. It was sort of like it was similar to being self-published. He self-distributed the film. So when it first came out and companies like Netflix offered him a deal, it was like they lowballed him. So he said, forget it. I'm going to do this myself. And he took that film to all these little theaters all over the country and introduced them personally and really connected with his audiences. And as a result, he sort of built a community of people who were either already excited about mushrooms and fungi or became excited as a result of seeing his movie. So, and then in the summer of 2020, kind of right in the middle of all the pandemic, shit that was going on, Louie called up and said, I really would like to do a Fantastic Fungi cookbook. And at first, when he said that, I was like, really, who needs a mushroom cookbook by me? There's plenty of great forager chef cookbooks out there. And I just, I couldn't get excited about that idea. But then after thinking about it a little while, it hit me. Why not do a community cookbook? I love these community cookbooks because there's an authenticity to the recipes and they're what people actually make for dinner. And beyond that, they represent not a collection of recipes, but a collection of people, a community. And it seemed to me that a community cookbook really kind of worked conceptually with what had excited Louie so much about the note about mycorrhizal fungi, right? For him, mycelium is, especially mutualists, the mycorrhizal fungi, the mycelium that has mutualistic relationships with trees in an ecosystem. For him, mycelium is a metaphor for collective action, like how we do better when we're connected to each other and help each other versus being siloed off into our own worlds. And in the midst of the COVID epidemic, that really resonated with me. And I think that message, resonated with people in general, and because that was his message when he was out, showing his film to people all over the country. So that was the idea. Let's do a Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. The community's there because Louie built it. And I happen to know that there is a mushroom community because I've been gallivanting around in it for years, going to clubs and forays and festivals and all that stuff. So then the question was, how to get recipes from this community. So I thought that I had an idea to do on his website, the Fantastic Fungi website, that we could do an interactive recipe sharing platform. And maybe if we had enough recipes, it would generate a book. So that's what we did. Our first discussion was in mid-July 2020. And I noticed, on the email threads, there's this company, Magical Threads. It's like, who the hell are they? Well, it turns out that they were really incredibly sweet people who Louie had hired to do his social media and just, I don't know, next phase of stuff for him in his career and life. And they look at this picture. They're really pretty far out. It took me a while to figure out what they actually did. But they were wonderful in then building this recipe sharing platform on the website. So there was a lot of work that had to be done for that. For example, I had to develop recipe guidelines. I had to figure out, what kind of recipes people could put up. Like, what if somebody puts up a composite recipe, like a quiche that's got a crust and a filling, how do we format the blocks for them to fill in if it's got multiple steps? Or what if it's just a narration, like when you're, I don't know, when it's just a technique, and not something with actual weights and measures. So we had to kind of figure out all that stuff. And then there also, I wanted a list of mushrooms by their Latin binomials. And of course, there was lots of resistance from the folks in Los Angeles about that. They were like, well, that's hard. But I really, they relented because I really had made it clear what the problem would be if everyone who was loading in mushroom recipes was using a different common name for the same species. I was really worried about trolls. Like people trying to, because it was my job to read through every recipe to make sure it was safe to eat. And I was just afraid that people would try to trick me and, put in something that I couldn't, that I would make a mistake, that would need some kind of special care, like, I don't know, a Gyromitra esculenta recipe or something. So one of the things we did was develop these kind of editor's notes, and somebody would try to do a Lepiota recipe. And I also contacted these folks. This is Ryan Bouchard and Emily Schmidt from the mushroom hunting. Oh, hold on a second. I've got it thing. I can't make that go away. All right. From the mushroom hunting, what does that say? Foundation. And then David, and what they're very expert in culinary mushrooms that are east of the Rocky Mountains. And then I got in touch with David Campbell, who used to be the president of the San Francisco Mycological Society, which is like a gigantic group. There's like thousands of people in it. Anyway, he's really expert in culinary mushrooms on the west side of the Rockies. So I figured between the two, they would be these three folks, so they would be able to make sure that I didn't let something slide and get published that on the website that would make somebody sick. Well, it turned out like the oddest thing that came in, and there were a few recipes for preparing psilocybe. I was also worried about getting enough mushrooms to test the recipes, because I was expecting, I don't know, I was expecting all kinds of mushroom recipes to come in, because I know how the community is really creative, and that a lot of people know a lot of species in their regions. So, the problem with, I live in New York City, and frankly, it's pretty provincial when it comes to wild mushroom retail. So I went on a kind of hunting rampage with these two guys. This is Charles Luce from the, and this is Paul Sadowski, both from the New York Mycological Society. And they are really, really knowledgeable. They know lots of different mushrooms. And so we were collecting all kinds of good stuff, brick caps and honeys and wild oysters and, all kinds of lion's manes, all kinds of mushrooms. And they're really lovely. These are my brothers in the woods. They're really lovely men to hunt with. Like this, take this chicken. They removed this chicken like a couple of dermatologists removing a mole. I mean, so carefully, so respectfully. I have it on film too. It took like 10 minutes to take that chicken off, which, I might have just yanked off that dead oak, but not them. And it's a real lesson in this sort of humility and gentleness in the woods to hunt with them. So while the website was being built, I started to try to up my knowledge game. Now, I have been cooking mushrooms for a long time and preserving them and writing about them. But I knew I was kind of getting to another level with this book. So I had long conversations with expert mycophagists. Mycophagy that's to eat mushrooms, like vegetable eaters are vegetarians and meat eaters are carnivores and mushroom eaters are mycophagists. Anyway, there are people like Eleanor Shavit, who is extremely knowledgeable about wild mushrooms. And you can see she's quite a collector. Yes, those are like pony kegs of dried mushrooms behind her. I spoke with Chad Hyatt, he's a book. Oh my God, I hope I can reach it easily. Where is it? He has a wonderful mushroom cookbook. I don't know why I'm not seeing it right this second. I can never find it easily. But anyway, keep an eye out. His books are good. They're very creative and kind of uh, they're ambitious. There's recipes that will really surprise. And I also spent, and he's in the Bay Area, and I also spent a lot of time chatting with Alan Burgo, who is a fantastic wild foods chef. And I talked to these folks about cooking, and there was other people, of course, and I talked to them about cooking techniques, and they shared this kind of basic information with me that was really useful. Like, you don't need fat to cook a mushroom. You need fat to flavor a mushroom if that's your thing, but they can be dry cooked or braised in water, and only finished in fat. They told me things like, in general, mushrooms retain their shape even when they're cooked really hard. It was Chad who pointed out that if you cook a potato and a mushroom, like a dense mushroom, say a white button mushroom, and you boil them both, that potato will disintegrate in the hot water a lot, in the boiling water, before there'll be any problems with the mushroom losing its integrity, which is amazing. But that might have something to do with the fact that their cell walls are made of the same stuff as shrimp shells. They explain the total non-controversy of getting mushrooms wet. And it's true. Like, the truth is, most of the time I'm hunting in the rain. And they explain a little bit about language, which was useful when putting together the book, because, like, sometimes you can read a recipe that'll say, caramelize your mushrooms, you cut them up, like when you're making a duck cells or something, caramelize your mushrooms. But caramelization is actually the reactions when sugars are heated, and that's true of onions. But mushrooms, maybe because they're closer to animals, they experience what's called the Maillard reaction, same thing that happens to a steak. And that's a chemical reaction between, when heat is applied, between amino acids and sugar. So it's a little, it's really a different phenomena. It's a different kind of chemistry going on. I learned that different dried mushrooms can take different kinds of rehydration. And indeed, I found out during this book that different cooks use a lot of different techniques for rehydration, but none of them have to use water. For example, there was one recipe that came in for a sous vide porcini, which you can actually do in a low oven too. And what he does is he puts the dried porcini into a mason jar and fills it up with cream, covers it, and then puts it in a very low oven for, like, I don't know, a couple of hours. I do know, it's the recipes in the book, but offhand, I don't know, but a couple of hours. And what comes out is this fully rehydrated porcini, but this cream that's like, oh, it's so unctuous. You just want to spread it all over your arms. I mean, it's really, really flavorful. The cream kind of thickens up a little. Yum. Anyway, so, who needs water when you can sous vide porcini? And there's lots of other, quirky things like peeling puffballs. They may be a lot of fun, but it's totally unnecessary. And eat dryad saddled young, and bluets growing under ornamental pepper trees totally suck. So they were really helpful, as were all the people I consulted. So we launched the website in late September 2020. And by mid-November, we really didn't have very many recipes at all. And I was getting kind of like uptight and desperate. And so I started just loading in my own. So there was some kind of action, So these are recipes, all that I loaded in. And then also recipes of my friends, like this is of Michael Woods. He's got this fantastic website. He's out of California, called MycoWeb. And Mike Woods, this recipe is as a farfalle with a gorgonzola sauce. You sort of melt gorgonzola down with cream or milk, or you can even do it with stock too. You melt it down to make a sauce, and then he adds sauteed black trumpets. it's fantastic. It's like 50 stages of mustiness. It's just so it's really a great dish. It's in the book. Anyway, I lurked around on Instagram, trying to invite people to submit recipes, and Facebook, Facebook pages where people where good mushroom cooks might post pictures and recipes. And I invited every club that I could get an invitation for. And then by early December, the recipes started to come in, about every other day. So recipes that really kind of gave me a lot of confidence that the project might pan out, because we got this beautiful pappardelle with pumpkin and boletes. These are pickled graylings. These graylings are these little tiny mushrooms that grow in hairy moss. I posted this picture when I found some graylings once, and I said, okay, you find them in hairy moss, and some guy wrote me and he goes, I'll be checking my hairy moss for those. Here, this is a porcini onion dip. So it's like a basic onion dip, but it has you dry the porcini and then you pulverize it and you add it to the caramelized onions. And it's like, I've made this probably 10 times. It's like every time I have a martini, I want to have this. And this dish also fantastic. This is a miso enoki tofu a soup that takes like 15 minutes to make. It's just great. I also, recipes that were coming in, I noticed had certain pairings that it just lots of people were sort of thinking the same way. Like I would see mushrooms with onions, garlic, shallots, or leeks. I'd see them with thyme, and surprisingly for me, rosemary. I'd see recipes with paprika, hot pepper, with vinegar and cream, tofu, sour cream, eggs, cheese, noodles, lots of recipes using those ingredients. And lots using mushrooms in place of meat in traditional recipes, like mushroom burgers, mushroom crab cakes. There were recipes where mushrooms augment a known dish like linguine with white clam sauce and hericium. There was one author who was a master of this. She submitted recipes calling for mushrooms as a secondary or primary ingredient based on lamb tangine, English beef pie, chicken yassa, that's a dish from Senegal, Hungarian stuffed peppers. I mean, it goes on and on. She was like a UN of recipes that she produced. Anyway, there were recipes using medicinal mushrooms, like these chaga chocolate cookies, and strawberries poached in birch polypore syrup. We got drinks, shrubs, teas, infused vodkas. And this one, my favorite, candy cap bourbon and milk punch. My husband and I drank a lot of these over last winter. They're good. There was a certain amount of repeat recipes like cream soups, onions, mushrooms, a roux, stock cream. And I could tell by reading that some recipes would require more development in terms of writing the recipe than I could handle time-wise. And so I didn't end up testing those. And it's sad because they're dishes that I think would be tasty, if the recipes accurately showed me how to make them tasty. But they were just too undeveloped at the get-go. And some were simply problematic, like this trumpets, fresh black trumpets that are sort of macerated in white wine, and I was a little bit like, oh, can't you develop a little food poisoning or something from that? Because, bacteria is very likely present on the mushroom, and it can grow in wine. I mean, it's not that alcoholic. I mean, you've probably had a corked wine that could be, this, in fact, the wine kind of tasted like a corked wine. I mean, it was cool. I enjoyed it, but I was unsure if it was safe. So I contacted my experts, and Ryan and Emily, they said, well, maybe the author can dry it first, or somehow ensure that there's no bacteria, sterilize it before putting in the wine. And then I called David Campbell, and he was like, why the fuck would you want to ruin a good glass of Chablis? So at the end of the day, I ended up getting the answer I needed from Britt Bunyard, who is the editor of Fungi Magazine, which I highly recommend you subscribe to. And he is also a microbiologist. So I asked him about it, and he goes, yeah, you get food poisoning from that. The only way you can ensure you wouldn't is if the alcohol is over 60 proof. So we had to pass on that recipe, even though I actually drank it and did not get sick. So we also got some canned foods. These are like pickles of different sorts. But since I couldn't be sure of their shelf stability, we had to either convert the recipe, or the ones we ended up using in the book could be refrigerator pickles, which we knew would be safe. And there were some college tries that were complete flops, like this recipe of mine: beans, maitake, and mussels. Kind of gross. But actually a recipe came along later that called for mussels and mushrooms. That's totally fabulous. This just didn't work. And then and some were just, wacky, like this recipe, which was oyster mushrooms, sweet potatoes, and roasted red peppers. I mean, it's not even like a recipe. It's more like these three things cooked separately and then served together. But I actually really love the recipe because the author, who is from Split, Croatia, she put in all these cool notes. You know how in a recipe it'll have C note, and usually it's like a little bit of extra information, or the little C note will tell you about, a substitution or something that you could do in the recipe. But this is not what this gal did. What she did is she wrote stuff like, I have it here in my notes. She said, she said, so you go to the note and it says, be joyful and slow as you can while you cook. Enjoy the flow, hence slow cooking. It's a mindful process, not a quick sex drive. Pardon my French. Observe it. Taste your pairing, red wine, and go back to having your moment with these royal oysters. Then she did another note elsewhere in the recipe, and it said, you should get even more relaxed of this symphony and indulge yourself in some excellent Cabernet Sauvignon, which I imagine she was enjoying while she wrote this recipe. A perfect wine pairing for this main course. I had it after surviving severe COVID complications, and it boosted my mood and it relaxed me. So, I mean, I obviously fell in love with this author, and I really wanted to just publish the recipe for the notes alone. But at the end of the day, I decided not to. So some of the recipes really stretched my knowledge. I'm an Italian cook primarily, so getting tempura right was a challenge. This is a delicate mushroom tempura. Likewise, this is a adobe mushi, which is a soup with steamed or very gently boiled matsutake mushrooms and fish and pieces of fish and pieces of different kinds of vegetable. It's not difficult at all. It's not complicated, but it's subtle, to make those. It's just very, it's very elegant and very, it's kind of sits on a certain taste peak, if you, if you're not careful, it doesn't taste like anything. So that was a challenge for me to kind of work on the recipe and understand how to do it right. And other things were just friggin' expensive, like this it turns out delicious matsutake gohan. But I didn't want to test it with $30 worth of matsutake, which I had to buy from California in the winter. So I tested it with these royal trumpets, and that was perfect. It worked really well. I found out the recipe was good, and then I went ahead and tried it with the investment. And I also, there's stuff that just really opened my eyes. Like this is a pan-based puffball. And it's a kind of interesting notion. It's not so dissimilar for how you would cook a pan-based fillet, like a filet mignon. So, you let's say in a fillet, you put your fillet in the oven, hot oven for 6 minutes. You take it out and you add a clump of butter, and then you baste that fillet with the butter to create that nice crust, right? So that's what this author was doing with the chopped puff balls. First, he put in a little water to get the cooking on them partly done, because you want to cook your mushrooms thoroughly. Once the water was cooked off, this is in a skillet, right, with just like a small amount of water in the bottom, and he had chopped up the puff balls into cubes. And then once the water cooked off, he added a little fat, got some brown. Oh no, he didn't. He got some brown on the pan, just from the pan. So he dry cooked the mushroom to get some the Maillard reaction. That's a little Maillard right there. And then he added his fat, and he basted the mushrooms for quite a while. And they were, frankly, they helped the puffball a lot. But it's a cool technique. He's applying, this is Alan Burgo did this. He's applying meat cooking technique to mushrooms. Very smart, and it works. So I also noticed that these recipes were coming from all over the country, certainly lots from the coasts. But wow, all kinds of places, and more were added. This was I did this in March. And then the tipping point kind of happened, and suddenly I had enough recipes and a book deal could come through. So the deal was with Insight Editions. It's a company in California, and they the publishers wanted 100 recipes. I ended up testing about 250 recipes to get there, most of them multiple times. So this was my operating criteria for the collection, because it was my job to, take these recipes and put them into some kind of cohesive form. So number one, did the recipe work? That's essentially like, did the cake rise? 2, did it taste good? 3, I didn't want to really waste authors' time by developing a recipe that might not make it into the book. So if it didn't seem like I would have to do much to pump the recipe up, which you sometimes have to do, I was surprised actually how many mild flavors were coming across in these recipes, because in cookbooks usually flavors up. So I didn't want to I didn't want to put the authors into any kind of position that made them uncomfortable and wasted their time. So that was one of the criteria. And also, were they relatively original recipes? Because on the website, you can put up anything you like. This is my favorite recipe from Food and Wine magazine for mushrooms. That's fine, because it's a free, open recipe sharing platform. But for the book, obviously, it had to be, we had to be able to make sure the credit was proper. Then the balance of dishes was a big challenge, because I'm looking at these recipes as they're coming in, and I'm like, wow, I got a lot of soups, but I don't really have very many mushrooms with fish. And that's a problem in a cookbook. You got to have, all kinds of different dishes represented. And also, do I have balance of species? Luckily, it did seem to have a pretty good balance of species coming in. I went through a period of thinking, wow, I'm just going to get all of these obscure mushrooms, which is not going to be very good for sales. I mean, people want to be able to make the recipes. There was only a few, and almost everything you could find dry. All the weird stuff I tested dry. So it was not a problem So nobody would be stuck saying, well, I can't get a fresh cauliflower mushroom, so I can't make this dish. Bullshit. You can buy it dried from Far West Fungi. It's okay. And the dishes were tested with both fresh and dried, so we knew they worked. And some recipes I didn't include because the authors just didn't follow the guidelines enough. So there'd be things like links in lieu of instructions, which I couldn't, do. And I didn't want to, there's just too little information in the recipe. And I'd have to assume too much to take it to the next step. And the kind of challenges that I faced in testing, because I tested them all, as I said, multiple times. Not every recipe on the website, obviously, as I just explained. But I tested all the ones, that were testable, as well as many from, colleagues and just random people from clubs and stuff who started to send them to me. So sometimes they put them up on the website, and sometimes they say, screw that, that's too much work, I'm just going to send it straight to Eugenia. So the kind of problems that I had is like, what is a handful of fresh trumpets? What is one bolete per person? I mean, these are all boletes. This is a big one. That's one. That's one. Most people cook using whole foods, one medium onion or something, but that's just not going to be so helpful for folks that are that are coming from different parts of the country with different produce. I mean, there was a recipe, delicious recipe for chicken thighs with dried porcini and leeks, and it called for 1 leek. And this is the leek I had. It's like huge. And I knew that it was too big for a recipe that called for 4 chicken thighs. So that's why we really had to switch to weights and measures. And I ended up having to, this is an example, I ended up having to create a list of ingredients and their approximate measurements so we can have some consistency. And when testing, I just used my own intuition to estimate what the author wanted. Like, I knew this guy, Gary Gilbert, did not want a leek this big in his recipe. I mean, I could tell. So then when I would go over the recipe with the author, I'd make sure that my assumptions were correct. And then there was problems of definitions. Is it a quiche or is it a tart? So I'd spent a lot of time trying to figure things out and then showing them my diagrams or my research to the authors to say, I think that we can't call this a tart. I think we should call it a quiche. What do you think? And I'd bring my little evidence to show why I thought that. I thought that was respectful too, because, these people, they know their recipes and they have the right to call them whatever the hell they want. But, we're trying to be professional for the book and all that. I also didn't have, a lot of people use pre-blended spices, which was interesting. Didn't really occur to me, but of course they did. And I often didn't have those pre-blended spices. So I ended up making them all myself, which is a lesson. You can make your own Old Bay, probably with ingredients you have in your spice cabinet right now. And you can make your own Cajun seasoning, probably with spices you have in your cabinets right now. And I was constantly grinding mushrooms for various powders. Here in this photograph, there is ground chaga powder and ground candy cat powder, which is, I don't know, one of those. So usually for a cookbook, and in my cookbook writing history, is that you'll have 12 months to deliver the manuscript. And during those 12 months, you'll be able to figure out the recipes as a collection. Like, you'll know I have X amount of egg recipes and X amount of pasta recipes and so on. But not in this case. We had 8 months from the website launch to supply 100 recipes and 90 photos. So it was really, really challenging. I'm going to start out telling, one of the challenges was, photography, because I know from experience that people eat with their eyes as well as with their mouths. And so I wanted really excellent photography. And I reached out to this fellow, Evan Sung, who I had worked with at the New York Times once. And I knew he knew cookbooks. So I called him just hoping that he would be free and affordable, because he's, kind of a big shot. And it was like the middle of COVID. There was not a lot of work. And he had just been down to Chile, where he had met Juliana Furci. So he was like, all hot for mushrooms. So he agreed to do the job. But the thing is that we had planned three-day sessions to do photography in January, March, and May. So we're shooting on a revolving schedule as the recipes come in, and we would test them, and I'd say, okay, this recipe is going to be good to go. Then we'd shoot them. And as I said, 10 recipes a day. Now, usually I know ahead what we're going to photograph, but not knowing ahead was really problematic. So for example, with this, I'm sorry, it's a little cloudy, but it's a screenshot. So with this black trumpet stuffed egg recipe, in the beginning, when we first started to shoot in January, most of the recipes that we had were ones that I had uploaded or my friends, so I knew they worked. We had them, and we had to shoot something. And so one of those recipes was black trumpet stuffed eggs. So we shot this picture, but I really didn't want to have that many recipes in the book. I felt like that would not, I didn't want that to be the case. Luckily, then later, months later, a black trumpet stuffed egg recipe came in. I was like, wow, I really hope. I tested it. It was delicious. And it looked a lot like, it's a stuffed egg with black trumpets. It's not going to look that different. So I was really excited. And I wrote the author, I sent her this picture, and I said, does this look like your eggs? And is it okay if we use this picture? Because it's actually my recipe, but does it look like your eggs? She goes, absolutely, looks 100% like them. So I was able to publish her recipe with this picture. And that happened a few times, but when it came down to the final selection, when it was time to start killing a few recipes, I killed my own, because I wanted a variety of voices. I didn't want to be dominant in any way. So anyway, I tested madly 2 to 3 recipes a day, sometimes multiple times for many months, 8 months, 10 months. I took photographs with my iPhones at different stages of the dish to see kind of what would look best. So I'd be kind of prepared for Evan when he came to shoot. So I would take a mise en place. Obviously, this is just my own shooting for that as a result, prior to testing or during testing. So a mise en place, then I do a kind of in preparation picture, and then I do a finished picture, and I would be able to decide. We didn't end up using this recipe, but it illustrates the kind of thing I would do for every recipe, except in the cases where I would forget to photograph them until I'd already eaten some. Like this dish, which is so good. It's a hoot la coche crepes dish, delicious. But it was too late for me to take any pictures. And actually, we didn't publish any pictures of any of the hoot la coche recipes, because hoot la coche looks friggin' evil. It's like this black goo, but it's so good. It's as delicious as it is evil looking. But it just didn't seem like the right thing to do. Photographing it wasn't the right thing to do. The administration for this book was really complicated, because at any given time, I was testing, editing, copy editing, photographing a recipe. So they were all in different stages at any given time. And we had a lot of steps. I had to get releases from people. So that meant get a hold of them. That meant they had to answer their emails, and this is like over 50 people that I formatted them. Then I would go over every recipe with the author. And that took, and that was really time consuming. I mean, I spoke on the phone with every author for an average of an hour, often more than that. But the truth is that it was by far the most rewarding part of the whole process for me. I mean, I know the names, I know like where they live, I know all of these people and where they're coming from and what they're into. I mean, we got personal. We talked about their recipe, and I'd ask questions like, do you really mean a third of a cup of broth? And then they would be like, oh God. Some people would retest. Some people would get so jazzed to be included that they would start sending in new recipes. So I was getting, those folks, you see a lot of their recipes in the book. And it was in the process of these Arthur queries, these conversations, that I would find out, oh, they meant boneless chicken thighs. They didn't write that in the recipe, and I'd already shot it with bone in. So then I'd have to test it again and have it both way. Okay, how is it boneless? How is it with the bone in? And say, okay, and this is a picture with the bone in. I just, sometimes I had to move forward, as I was saying before, with the photography before the recipe was print ready. And that could be tricky. So our editor, Vanessa, and I sorted through the challenges of the rolling publication together. And one of those challenges was creating chapters. So since we didn't know what was coming in, and we were trying to build this at, this rolling publication, we didn't know what diversity of foods was going to be like, and we didn't know what diversity of ethnicities were going to be represented. So, we were like, how are we going to anticipate, what's going to be general enough? Do we organize as small plates and large plates, or, first course, second course? Well, that's kind of Eurocentric, and we were getting Asian recipes in. So finally, the problem was resolved after checking in with the master. I hope you all have this book. She's wonderful, Jane Grigson. And we kind of did something similar, not the same, but similar to the way she organized the mushroom feast is how we organized the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. And this is what we basically came up with. And all the recipes fit in here, one or another of these categories. So the photography was insane, right? So we had 3-day blitzes where 30 recipes had to be shot. I did the prep in my kitchen, and the storage, oh my God, there was so much food in the fridge. And then the propping, I had to put on these little cards to remind myself, okay, this dish takes boiled potatoes and parsley. I mean, the cooking and the cleanup. This is my dishwasher. You see, it plugs onto the faucet, and it takes like 5 hours to wash dishes. And it sounds like the JFK, airplanes taking off. I mean, it's so the first shoot, here's Evan at work with the first photograph. The first shoot was, and these are the pickles, because thank God I had been able to make them ahead of time and they were in the fridge. But Evan, the first shoot was in New York City in January. And there were not a lot of fresh mushrooms around. So I was really, I was like using a lot of my frozen stuff to test, but for photography, you needed the fresh stuff. And so we were really saved by Far West Fungi in California. They sent us the most glorious mushrooms, as you can see, divine mushrooms in January. I also got help from Nenny Panergia and Pam Krause. Pam Krause is my former editor at Random House of my cookbook. She's a cookbook person. And Nenny Panergia has a few recipes in the book, and she's a very, very, very accomplished home cook. And these two women, were like goddesses, like just tattooed with burns. They could do anything. I'd say, give me a poached egg in 12 minutes. And they're like, out it would come 12 minutes later, perfectly in a little towel, shaped just right. It was just, they were fantastic. And they just did it day after day, just for the booze at the end of the day. And then the propping, so propping was really like, I used everything I have. and I used everything my friends have and my family. But I got a lot of help from my friend Natalie Smith, who has the store Global Table, which is probably the most fabulous tabletop store in Manhattan. And I borrowed tons and tons of stuff from her. And that was because I really wanted each recipe photograph to have an individual feel, like to have its own props, its own kind of vibe. But at the same time, I wanted the pictures to be consistent from photo to photo, like, so it felt like a book, and I wanted them to have this kind of woodsy gourmet type feel, but also be elegant because, frankly, a lot of mushroom cookbooks, the photography doesn't really elevate it too much. I mean, I do think that the Blizzards book, I forget the name of that one too, the Mushroom Hunters Cookbook, maybe it's called, or maybe it's the Mushroom Forge. I say I'm looking at my bookshelf again. Anyway, the Blizzards did a wonderful book and their photography was great. But in general, you tend to see drawings and stuff, and the photography is just not, upmarket enough to really kind of reach a lot of people. So we were trying to get there with this book. But food photography is challenging. It's a kind of porn. You want to lick this food, and not everything likes to be photographed. Like risotto, for example, is just really hard to photograph, and creamy things, especially if they're kind of chunky, sort of looks like, I don't know, kind of vomity, right? It's really hard to make look good. And some things were just, I was also, the ladies were helping me, but, we all three were doing the cooking and the propping and I was doing the propping and the styling to the extent that these things are styled. And, so like this tortilla, for example, this took me 3 tries to make, I just couldn't make the tortilla that day. It's frustrating as hell. And other times, like, how do you prop a proper Japanese mushi tabletop? I ended up going online and trying to buy a proper teapot for the simmering of the soup. And then there's the challenge of shooting dishes where you can't really see the mushrooms. So in this case, this is a creamed egg and mushroom dish. This is a classic Midwestern dish. You serve it with biscuits. And, it's like, mushrooms are kind of hard to see. Or this dish, which is a delicious smoky black bean soup with hulacoche. Who can see the hulacoche? Or this is Jack Zernacki's Brussels sprouts with truffle oil and microgreens and truffle butter and chopped toasted hazelnuts. Delicious, but who can see the melted truffle butter? I guess I say our last hurdle was models in the COVID era. Mainly we just had the old hands of 60-something white women. It's not okay, so we recruited my son, my daughter, my son and daughter's friends, and we're able to get a little bit more, youth and diversity in our pictures. And this, by the way, is like, to me, the sort of emblematic picture of the book. This is a polenta on the board. Polenta is sort of soft and poured onto a board, preferably a poplar board, because that's what stays warm. But polenta on the board with a meat and tomato and honey mushroom sauce. Originally, the recipe also called for small little game birds. So during the shoots, the kitchen situation was completely grueling and crazy. I mean, as the day progressed, I'd start losing stuff like the pepper grinder, or I'd forget to put the potatoes on the dish, over time, I did figure out I needed to have an idea of which shot should come next. It's a little bit of a learning process for me to do this heavy. I've done plenty of my own cooking and propping for my cookbooks. I've done it for all my cookbooks, but it's my stuff. It's my food. I know what it looks like. I use my own stuff over and over again. It's very easy for me to time because I know how long everything, it's just a whole different bag. This is recipes from all these different peoples. They all required a learning curve that was kind of new to me. Yeah, so I had to start, making these, figuring out like what the schedule was, right? In terms of just making sure that the oven was managed. And during the process, Evan was printing out these nifty little Polaroids, which I thought were like souvenirs. So it's been a while since I've done a cookbook, and I never had, none of my photographers ever had these cool little printers, these tiny little printers where they print out like the Polaroids at the same, just at the same time. That was new to me. And so, I thought he was giving them to me to show my friends, my family. But on the second to last day of shooting, I had a food stylist who was from the New York Mycological Society. And she said, let me come and help you for a day. And I was like, great. And so she came and she said, so where are the Polaroids? And where's the storyboard? And I said, the what? And she said, all the pictures of the food so we can see what props you've used in a chapter. And I was like, oh, so I went and found them and I pinned them up on the wall that day. And here they are. Okay, here's a quick look at the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. Mushrooms with pasta, rice, and soup. Mushrooms on their own or with vegetables. There's lots of those recipes. Mushrooms with eggs. Mushrooms with fish. Mushrooms with poultry. Mushrooms with meat. And mushroom desserts, drinks, and condiments. Yeah. So I got it. I understood that the point is, you get to see the props, the angles, and you have an opportunity to create variety in a chapter. Too bad I figured that out in the second to last day. Anyway, we started out with some pretty standard stuff, processed shots. This is a mushroom. These are duxelle gyoza. And, basic setups. This is a crab and cordyceps bisque, delicious, little saltines. This is Britt Bunyard's recipe for chicken with morels, a stick of butter and a bottle of sherry. Highly recommend this. This is a great dish. And also we had to do all those kinds of little shots that would be useful to the art director. So, these are kind of insert things that they can put into the, that they can insert where needed. But then by the second shoot series, I started to get a little better at it. I was doing mise en places and I started to think about props a little differently. I trusted Natalie from Global Table and Evan to, do their own thing a little bit. So Natalie had said to me, you definitely take these plates. Your photographer will love them because they're matte. And I was like, they don't look very mushroomy to me. Evan loved them. And we put in them this dish, which is rice pilaf with mushrooms and shrimp, and it's from northern Greece, and it's flavored with these warm spices like cinnamon. It's absolutely terrific. Anyway, Evan set up this, this photograph, and Natalie provided the props, and boom, I think it looks great. And I also then I started to think a little differently about how to look at something. So this is a Agaricus bisporus, a white button, blood orange and shaved fennel salad. So we just didn't even put a plate underneath it. We just poured it out on the board. This is Larry Evans from the Montana Club's morels baked in brie. So it's a kind of a graphic thing. What he does is he cuts the brie like a bagel, and then he sautés morels, puts some nutmeg in it, which is a very nice touch. On top, puts the brie on top, and then he wraps the whole thing in like Pepperidge Farm puff pastry, bakes it for 17 minutes. Boom, it's delicious. This is a candied jelly ear, which is just surprising and tasty. And I even tried some risky stuff. Like here, I put the cigarette in the background of the vodka, the Chanterelle vodka, which I also had a picture with pistachios. That's the one that they chose for the book. Obviously, I knew they weren't going to put the cigarette in. And in here, this is this woman, Dorothy Carpenter from Missouri. This is her Pleurettes on Toast. It's a kind of ladies' lunch thing. And we set it up as like, the reason why we did this setup is because my daughter had seen these Polaroids, because I thought I was just had them to show people. And she said, these are beautiful, but the truth is, most people eat standing up at the counter or in front of the TV. And I was like, you're right. My husband and I eat in front of the TV every night. We set it up, but we still watch a show. So we did this setup in front of the TV. And at first I was going to put the Fantastic Fungi movie on there, but I thought too pandery. So it's the French Connection. So if you see the shot, I think they actually cut it, but that's, a little backstory. And I did stuff like put dirt backgrounds. I got a little, I don't know, creative. This is my pièce de résistance. This is Jane's candy cap punch with some sleeping medications. Of course, that's not in the book, but I thought you'd find it amusing. And this one here, this is a quiche from Gary Linkoff and Irene Lieberman. I hope you all know who Gary Linkoff is. He wrote the Audubon Book of Mushrooms. And he's a mentor to many, many people before he died, and certainly a mentor to me. And I happen to be in possession right now. Well, not in possession, but I'm storing a bunch of his field notebooks. And these are 2 of Gary's field notebooks. They're full of notes about finding mushrooms. And you'll know when you see this picture, you'll know that. So after the edit and the copy edit, there's layout, there's proofing, and the very last thing to be established is the title and cover. So titling and cover is always a push-pull between editorial and marketing. I mean, we really need each other. Editorial tries to protect the content's integrity, and marketing is trying to get the content out there. So marketing tends to, so the marketing department with this book, they wanted to call the book Fantastic Fungi, the Community Cookbook, with a brand sign, so that, I don't know, it wasn't stolen or copied or something. But I really totally objected. That was the hill actually that I was going to die on, because, the publishers are coming from a movie book space. They publish all kinds of cookbooks, but they also publish books associated to movies, things like, I don't know, the Obi-Wan Kenobi Great Book of Chicken Recipes. Like, they'll publish stuff like that. And so that's why they would try to protect the Star Wars brand. But I persuaded them that we had a really upmarket book, and out of respect for the authors, we really needed to stay away from any kind of fan book vibe. So I also tend personally to unusual covers. I had actually pitched this as a cover to them. And they were like, no, but maybe we'll make postcards or puzzles with it. Many years ago, I tried to get my publishers, a book I wrote called The Kitchen Ecosystem, to publish corn cobs on the cover, because the book, The Kitchen Ecosystem, is a book from apples to zucchini, including meat and fish. And all the recipes have to eat some fresh, to preserve some, to use the preserves, and to use the waste stream. So for the corn section, there's stuff to make with cobs, beautiful stocks and stuff, ice cream and stocks. I thought, yeah, let's put corn cobs on the cover. And they said, no, that's not going to sell a cookbook. Anyway, I was hoping for something kind of crazy, but what we ended up with, I'm really happy with. And that's this dish, which is a picture of Graham Steinruck, his shiitake duck congee. And it's kind of fun because it's got a lot of different little things happening. So currently, we're in publicity. I was able to convince our publicist to let all the authors speak for themselves. So at first the publicist was like, do we really want to do that? Don't we want a controlled message? And I was like, no, we really don't. We have 50 plus authors, and, let's contact all their local media and say, hey, you've got an author in your city or your town. why don't you contact them and why don't you do a story on them, let them talk about their recipe and their experience with this book and why they're interested in mushrooms. They know the mushrooms that are regional to your area. It's better that they do it. And if some of them are completely kooky, fabulous. I think that's great because it's who we are. I also got authors discounts. So usually as an author, you get like a 40% discount when you buy your books yourself to, I don't know, give your family, whatever. But we've got 56 authors and I'm really proud of myself. I persuaded the company to give all of them authors discounts. So everybody's buying their Christmas presents with their own recipes. And almost all the recipes have a photograph, out of 100 recipes, 90 of them have photographs. And finally, we're doing a party for over 400 for over 50 authors. That's, I think, possibly that every author deserves a publishing party, and I think it's possibly going to be the biggest book publishing party in history. I mean, we're all getting together on Zoom, 5 time zones, and having a self-congratulatory cocktail together. So, in conclusion, a few quick takeaways from cooking all these different recipes by so many authors. Number 1, I learned how many different tastes there are of mushrooms out there, and how those tastes can be enhanced by either combining them with complementary ingredients like chanterelles and apricots, or hericium and fish, or otherwise bringing them out with particular spices. I learned that the mushroom's ability to withstand most any kind of cooking it's surprising but true. You don't have to be scared about cooking mushrooms multiple times. For example, that enoki tofu soup I showed you a picture of, I made that recipe, tested it, was fabulous. And then I had some left over, and I also had some clams. So I just added them together and I recooked the soup just for my own appetite. And I thought for sure those little enokis, which are like little white nails, would just be mush. But no, they held their bite and their integrity. I mean, they're tough. The mushrooms, you can cook them over and over and they'll still be good. I learned that they're easily substituted for meat in many kinds of recipes, and how cooking meat can inform cooking mushrooms. I learned to love the cultivated varieties on a whole new level. So like a lot of wild mushroom foragers, I was kind of snobby about white button mushrooms. I was like, but I've really come based on the many excellent Agaricus bisporus recipes in this book, I would say it's not the mushroom, it's the cook. And finally, I learned how much easier it is to get a good night's sleep on a belly full of mushrooms rather than, I don't know, something else, because frankly, I ate them almost every night for 6 months. But most of all, these are my friends from the New York Club. I knew there were many terrific cooks in the community, and getting to know some of them has truly enriched my life. I'm so happy that now we can kind of once again meet. We're at a place, where we can dine together and eat mushrooms and drink wine. And as my friend David Campbell says, breathe all over each other. So that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't run too much over and wear everybody out. I think I did run over, but please share your favorite recipes. The rest of the website lives on, and you can find me at eugeniabone.com. I have a cooking class coming up where I'm going to do a few recipes from the book, including these delicious sausage and mushroom duxelle rolls. This is like stoner food, truly. Well, I appreciate it. I really am sending, best wishes to your club. I just think it's fantastic what you guys are doing, and, welcome to the community, man. And, the more the merrier. And we love, Nebraska. It's great that you're putting Nebraska on the mushroom map.